January 4, 2021, the quiet Durban suburb of Shallcross was rocked by a shocking and brutal execution. Yaganathan Pillay, a man both revered and reviled, was gunned down in broad daylight inside his family home. Hours later, the two suspects were dead, decapitated and burned by an enraged mob right outside his property. The scene resembled a horror film. But this wasn't fiction. This was the violent end of a man known on the streets, and in the media, as Teddy Mafia. Who was Teddy Mafia? To some, he was a protector, a benefactor, a man who looked after his community when the government turned a blind eye. To others, he was a drug lord, the alleged head of one of KwaZulu-Natal's most feared narcotics empires. This is the story of a man whose life was shrouded in secrecy and speculation, whose death raised even more questions than it answered. The man behind the name. Yaganathan Pillay was born and raised in the bustling Indian community of Shallcross, a densely populated suburb in Durban, South Africa. Not much is publicly known about his early life, but by the 2000s, Pillay had cemented himself as a prominent figure in the area. He wasn't a politician, a businessman, or a religious leader, yet everyone knew his name. In Shallcross, Teddy Mafia was the man you called when you needed help, or when you couldn't turn to the police. He earned the nickname not just because of his physical build, short and round like a teddy bear, but because of the contrast between his seemingly soft outward demeanor and the dangerous reputation that followed him. He donated food parcels during holidays, paid school fees for children whose parents couldn't afford them, funded community events. His home, a large double-story property on Torres Street, was well-guarded, lavish, and always buzzing with activity. But beneath the surface, whispers of his involvement in drug trafficking grew louder. Public secret. Though never formally convicted of any major drug-related crime, Pillay's name was constantly linked to narcotics. Community members spoke in hushed tones about the pills and powder allegedly distributed under his control. Police raids on his home yielded firearms, cash, and drugs. He was arrested multiple times, most notably in 2016 and again in 2020, but somehow always walked free. Charges were dropped, cases postponed, evidence lost. Law enforcement officials suspected Pillay was deeply embedded in South Africa's illicit drug trade. But in Shallcross, many viewed him differently. Some called him the Robin Hood of Chatsworth. His influence extended into religious circles, political gatherings, and even law enforcement. He had loyal followers who believed he was being targeted unfairly by corrupt police. In a 2020 interview, Pillay vehemently denied all accusations. He claimed he was a businessman, a family man, a community servant. And in many ways that was true. But what was also true was that people around him had a habit of turning up dead. The final day. On the morning of January 4, 2021, Pillay reportedly received a phone call. He told his daughter that two men were coming over to discuss a business matter. According to her, he was calm, unconcerned. Just after midday, the men arrived. Within minutes, gunshots rang out. Pillay had been shot twice in the head at close range, allegedly by the very guests he had welcomed into his home. His daughter ran to the scene and found him critically wounded. He was rushed to Chatsmed Hospital, but by the time they arrived, he was already gone. Outside, chaos erupted. Neighbors and loyal followers who had heard the news descended on the scene. The two suspects, who had been apprehended by Pillay's private security or possibly by enraged residents, were dragged outside, beaten, beheaded, and burned. Graphic images flooded social media. Two charred, headless corpses lying in the street. The smoke of vigilante justice billowing into the sky. The incident shocked the nation. A bloody message. The brutal retaliation made one thing clear. Teddy Mafia was not an ordinary man. His murder wasn't just a personal attack, it was a challenge to a structure of power that had operated in the shadows for years. The question everyone asked was, who killed Teddy Mafia, and why? Some suspected a drug turf war. Others believed it was an internal betrayal. Perhaps he had grown too powerful or too public. In the underworld, fame is dangerous. KwaZulu-Natal police promised an investigation, but months passed with no significant arrests. Community members remained tight-lipped. Witnesses claimed they feared for their lives. The silence spoke volumes. Police, politics, and power. The Teddy Mafia case highlighted the deep cracks in South Africa's justice system. For years, residents had complained that police were either too afraid or too compromised to act. Some officers were suspected of being on the payroll of criminal syndicates. Former KwaZulu-Natal Hawks boss Johan Boysen had once warned about systemic corruption within law enforcement, and Pillay's case seemed to validate those fears. The impunity with which his alleged killers were executed also raised alarm bells. How could two men be beheaded and burned in a crowded neighborhood in broad daylight, without a single arrest? South Africa, a nation plagued by violent crime, has seen its share of bloody retribution. But the Teddy Mafia killing opened old wounds in a community that had long lived with the consequences of unofficial justice. A community divided. In the days following his death, hundreds attended Pillay's funeral. Some came to mourn. Others came to watch. The event was held under tight security. Floral arrangements, traditional prayers, tearful speeches. His daughter called him a good man, a protector. She compared him to Pablo Escobar, but with a heart of gold. Media outlets debated whether this was mourning or myth-making. Outside Shallcross, many viewed Pillay as a symbol of what was wrong with South Africa's crime-ridden communities, where gangsters become heroes because they do the work the state refuses to. Inside Shallcross, the sentiment was more complicated. Some residents claimed life had become more peaceful since his death. Others felt less safe now that their protector was gone. The aftermath. More than 2 years after his assassination, no one has been formally charged with his murder. The two suspects are dead. Their identities have never been fully confirmed. The investigation stalled. The evidence cold. Pillay's home remains a local landmark. Some say it's cursed. Others say it's watched, by those who want to make sure the silence continues. But the name Teddy Mafia lives on, in whispered stories, cautionary tales, and the uneasy memory of what happens when power, crime, and community become indistinguishable. Legend or lie? Was Yaganathan Pillay a criminal mastermind or a victim of smear campaigns? Was he protecting Shallcross or controlling it? Did he build his empire through fear or respect, or both? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. What remains undeniable is the influence he wielded, the fear he inspired, and the violent way in which his story ended. In a country where the line between justice and vengeance is often blurred, the death of Teddy Mafia was not just the fall of one man, it was a glimpse into the heart of a community shaped by violence, survival, and silence. This was the life and death of Teddy Mafia. A man whose legacy is still being written, in ashes, headlines, and unanswered questions. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more South African true crime stories. See you in the next video.